I'm Sara Blackard, and I'm coming to you from Alaska, beautiful Alaska. We have a very sunny day today after a bunch of rain, so I thought I'd read you from my book, Vestige of Hope, outside, so that way I can get some vitamin D. So this is Vestige of Hope, and it is my debut novel that came out in December. And it's the first book in my Vestige in Time series. So without further ado, Chapter 1, June 10th, 2018. Hunter Bennett ran flat out as if the hounds of hell pursued him, and considering he was approaching the Devil's Causeway in the Colorado Flat-Top Wilderness, the sentiment was fitting. He grunted, pushing himself harder up the snow-covered mountain to the ridge that resembled the Great Wall of China. If only it were just hellhounds chasing him, compelling him to move faster, push harder, and not his own demons of failure stalking just over his shoulder. His foot slipped on the talus covering the mountainside, forcing him to put all of his focus on the arduous climb, lest he tumble all the way to the bottom, breaking his neck. Wouldn't that just be fitting? U.S. Army Delta Force operator found dead after falling down a mountain in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, the newspaper would say, though they would leave out the Delta Force bit since that part of his life was strictly off the books and didn't exist. The unit would never let him live it down. No, he needed focus, control. If he couldn't climb a little mountain without screwing up, he didn't deserve to go back to the Army, let alone the unit, after his mandatory R&R was finished. Hunter crested the ridge and slowed as he came to the land bridge. Beautiful verdant basins filled with aspens unfurling their spring green leaves edged up the slick talus rocks on either side of the mountain. The snow dotting the mountaintops laughed down on the green in challenge. The Bear River flowed on the side he'd hiked up from. Lakes dotted the land where he planned to camp on the opposite side, glittering like sapphires and emeralds sewn into the lush fabric of God's creation. Hunter sat on the 3-foot middle of the Devil's Causeway, letting the crisp early morning air cool him, and grabbed his canteen and energy bar. While being 10,000 feet above sea level didn't bother him too much, he knew if he didn't keep hydrated, he'd be hurting later. He pulled out his detailed topographical map he'd printed from the satellite before leaving and surveyed the lakes below, wondering which one would provide his dinner. He took a deep breath in, his heart already slowed to normal, and closed his eyes as the sun warmed the back of his neck. Hunter needed this, the quiet of the wind blowing across the mountain ridge, the whisper of birds singing in the trees far below. Maybe he would hear God speak with him again in the wilderness's solitude. Maybe he'd forgive Hunter for his failure to protect those he'd entrusted Hunter to protect. A hawk screamed in the sky above, yanking Hunter back to a moment 3 weeks before when the screams were from a filthy and bloodied little blonde-headed girl in the humid jungle of Columbia. Hope Isaac. He could still feel her skinny arms and legs wrapped tightly around him as he'd rushed her from the barn the kidnappers kept her and her parents in. The kidnappers had executed her diplomatic missionary parents mere seconds before his team could neutralize the situation. Hunter had hesitated too long, not listening to God's silent urging within him to hustle, wanting everything to be perfect, control. Because of his hesitation, he'd not only failed God, but also that beautiful, sweet orphaned Hope, whose screams of terror and anguish still echoed within his brain. Hope. Hope no longer existed. The hawk screamed overhead again, and the demons had caught up. Hunter stood abruptly, slung his pack over his back, and took off at a run across the ridge. He found a path of descent that looked particularly dangerous and worked his way down, forcing himself to focus on the snow, the slippery rocks, the trees, the placement of his feet, the maximum effort he could execute without killing himself. All while keeping quiet like he'd been trained to do. He rounded a large boulder about 3/4 of the way down the mountainside 3/4 of the way down the mountainside and ran straight into the biggest mountain lion he'd ever seen. Not that he'd ever really seen any mountain lions this up close and personal. The startled cat swiped at him as Hunter spun away, catching him across the chest in searing pain as the contact pushed him off balance and down the mountain. He'd always hated cats. He tumbled through the sharp talus straight toward the little ravine as he was hoping to skirt at the bottom. With the angry lion chasing him from up at top, he half laughed, half shouted in pain at the irony of it all. Not only would the newspaper report about him falling down a hill, but now he'd allowed himself to be kitty lunch. That's just fantastic, he thought as he slid to the bottom of the mountain, flipping headlong into the ravine and into blackness. So, Vestige of Hope.